Mr. President, as I return to the nation's capital from home back in Austin, Texas, so we can finish our work out before the end of the year, I wanted to relay some of the wisdom that I heard from working families and Texans back home about their verdict on what we have done so far this year and actually even last year. I stopped by a couple of food banks, one in North Texas and one in El Paso. Ahead of this year's upcoming holiday season, this is when they have the greatest demand on food from people who need to either supplement their diet or depend on food banks to provide them their basic sustenance. I also had a chance to visit with a Nobel Prize winner at MD Anderson Hospital, Dr. Jim Allison, to discuss his groundbreaking work in cancer treatment, much of which was funded by money that we've appropriated to the National Institutes of Health that in turn makes grants for basic science and other research that comes up with life-saving cures, such as Dr. Allison has come up with. And then I met with local leadership in the Corpus Christi area down on the Gulf Coast to discuss their Hurricane Harvey recovery process. It's been a little over a year since Hurricane Harvey hit, and of course many of those communities and many families are continuing to recover from that devastation. I also held a roundtable with local leaders and the Drug-Free Communities Council to discuss how local, state, and federal leaders can work together to fight the supply of illegal drugs coming into the country and support those who are in recovery from addiction. And it won't surprise you that people had a lot to say. But their stories remind me that back here in Washington, although Texas is a long way away, about 3 hours or so by jet, folks back home are paying attention to what we are doing here. And I know some of that gets lost in the back and forth of the political campaigns just past. But there is one thing that we have done that I think has been well received, and that is since the voters gave us a Republican in the White House and gave us Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, we put our foot on the gas pedal and we haven't let off since. And we've delivered concrete results for the American people, and they've continued to see gains under this administration. Promises made and promises kept. I'll start with the transformation of the federal judiciary. This is one of the most important jobs that the United States Senate has under the Constitution, to provide advice and consent on executive branch nominations. Executive branch, in this case, to our Article III courts. A historic number of judges who will interpret the law as written have been confirmed under this administration. That number is 84, and it includes the most ever appellate judges, the mid-level federal courts, confirmed during a president's first 2 years in office ever. These are principled, experienced, highly skilled lawyers and judges who respect precedent and understand their critical but limited role under our system of government. Their job is to interpret the law. They shouldn't rewrite it, which is one of the principal battlegrounds we end up fighting when Supreme Court nominations come across the well of the Senate floor. There are those who think that judges should be able to impose their views on the American people even though they don't run for election and they have lifetime tenure. But that's simply not our system, and that's an impermissible role to be played by a judge, in my view. When it comes to judges, perhaps our two greatest achievements have been Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, both of whom have been confirmed to the United States Supreme Court. But as I say, we've confirmed 84 other total federal judges, including 3 on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals from Texas. Each of these nominees and now judges have brought great intellect, legal expertise, and impartiality and goodwill to bear as they make decisions with their very distinguished colleagues. Then we saw the first major overhaul in the tax code in 31 years. that lowered rates for every tax bracket, doubled the child tax credit to help working families, and made our business tax scheme more competitive globally. All of this has allowed many of those employers to pass along benefits through bonuses and higher wages. We've also incentivized investment in economically distressed communities in every state through the Opportunity Zone program. Some like to shrug off the benefits of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, calling the savings crumbs. That was what Ms. Pelosi called it. But they're certainly not taking account of what I am hearing from my constituents back home in Texas, because the effects of tax reform are real and they're extremely significant to every American. All employers have been able to provide additional benefits. As I said, some in the form of bonuses or increased pay, and those who have seen their pay remain the same have seen more take-home pay because their tax obligations have been reduced. One of those taxpayers I heard from in Texas was a gentleman by the name of David Tong from Arlington, Texas. That's halfway between Fort Worth and Dallas. David wrote to me to say that the company where he's employed has increased the number of people that the hours people were able to work. He said Christmas bonuses have been promised too, and the company's hired more people, bought more new machinery based on the accelerated depreciation provided for under the bill, and made long overdue repairs to their working place. Now with the tax law changes in place, David says the guys down on the shop floor are taking home a little more in their paycheck each week. He said all of this adds up and makes a huge difference in the lives of the guys on the shop floor. We've heard similar stories around the country because more than 700 companies, including many based in Texas, have used the tax savings to benefit their employees and their customers. They've announced pay raises, as I said, 401k match increases. We've actually seen seniors and people on fixed incomes have a decrease in their utility bills when their electricity is provided by investor-owned utilities because of the reduction in taxes paid by those investor-owned utilities. So lower utility rates for seniors and those on fixed incomes. These developments are part of the reasons why the economy is thriving. Since tax reform was signed into law, the economy has added more than 2 million jobs, and unemployment is at its lowest rate since 1969. 1969. My state has a population that's roughly 38 to 40% Hispanic, and yet Hispanic unemployment sits at a record low of 4.4%. That's a big deal to my constituents back home. And joblessness for African Americans has fallen to its lowest level ever. Lowest level ever under this administration. And then, of course, with more demand, with more money in people's pockets, more money to spend, there's more demand for goods and services. And so in October alone, the economy has added another 250,000 jobs, exceeding all expectations. Matter of fact, the biggest concern I hear from employers now is they're looking for qualified employees who are able to perform the jobs that are now available. And many of these are very well-paying jobs. So people are back to work, they're earning more, they're investing, and the economy is moving at full throttle. But it wasn't just the work of the tax bill. That was just part of it. Part of it has to do with the increased confidence and optimism people feel about their future as a result of the improvement of their economic circumstances. We saw that with the passage of bipartisan Dodd-Frank reform, we've also provided additional relief to our community banks and credit unions so they're able to spend less money on red tape and more money invested in their local communities and their small businesses. We also know that regulation is important, but over-regulation is a job killer. And we've rolled back over-regulation that was stifling job creation and creating an environment, and when we help create an environment that fosters job growth. Our reforms have created a savings of at least $50 billion for small businesses and entrepreneurs. That's why the economy is on fire. We've also done important things to help improve access to health care. We've repealed the Independent Payment Advisory Board provisions of Obamacare and repealed the costly individual mandate, which essentially was a tax on poor people and middle-income people when they couldn't afford to buy the Obamacare policies with all of the coverage that they didn't necessarily even want or need, but it added to the cost of the policy. And when they couldn't afford the policy, they were taxed by their own government and punished through the individual mandate. What we have done is to try to restore the authority and the power of citizens themselves to make health care decisions for themselves and their family that they want and that they can afford by starting to recreate an individual market. To me, that's the best way for us to offer choice and to keep prices down, is to create an individual market, not for government to mandate a one-size-fits-all approach, which is what Obamacare did, forcing many young people to pay a lot more for their insurance to subsidize others who were covered by Obamacare. We also addressed the public health challenges we face in this country in another significant way. The nation's drug addiction epidemic killed roughly 72,000 Americans last year. 72,000 Americans lost their lives to drug overdoses. Nearly 50,000 of those were related to opioid, whether prescription drug or heroin or fentanyl. It's left many families in disarray and overwhelmed medical professionals and emergency personnel in many communities. Through the collaboration of about 70 bipartisan proposals, people say nothing bipartisan happens here, but thanks to 70 bipartisan proposals that were included in this landmark opioids bill, we're not only to address stemming the tide of drugs coming across our border, but also supporting those who are trying to recover from a drug addiction. Among other reforms, the law requires screening of packages being mailed from overseas for substances like fentanyl. It increases access to treatment for people with substance disorders, expands research into non-addictive painkillers, and provides more money for enforcement and interdiction. But healthy communities are also safe communities. In addition to the opioids bill, we took further steps to enhance the safety of our communities and help deliver help to victims. With 3 new laws, we aim to reduce the backlog of untested rape kits in forensic labs so that perpetrators of sexual assault can be identified with near certainty and those wrongly charged can be exonerated. We also have assisted our law enforcement in prosecuting cold cases and eradicating the scourge of online sex trafficking. We didn't stop there, though. We kept communities' needs in mind and turned toward fixing our nation's outdated infrastructure. In October, we passed a major water infrastructure bill that helps keep our communities safe by providing dams and levees and addressing the need for drinking water, clean, safe drinking water, and addressing the underdevelopment of wastewater systems across the country. But our work on infrastructure extended far beyond public water systems. It also included passing the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Act that modernizes airport infrastructures, increases safety, and boosts industry innovation. We also helped support our men and women in uniform, past and present. By passing a defense authorization bill, we gave our troops the largest pay raise in nearly 10 years and began to restore military readiness in an increasingly dangerous world. The National Defense Authorization Act, named after our former chairman of the Armed Services Committee, John McCain, ensures our troops have the resources, the equipment, and the training they need to defend our country and keep Americans safe. And for our veterans, we passed the Veterans Administration Mission Act, again, a bipartisan piece of legislation. Access to health care had become a nightmare for many who sacrificed so much for our country. We saw them met with difficulty in getting appointments, because they were backlogged so much or that they had to drive great distances to get access to basic health care. And so we passed the VA Mission Act with an eye toward providing more accessible access to care in local communities. Beyond that, Mr. President, we did the basic work of funding the federal government on time and through regular order. We haven't finished that job yet. We have until December the 7th to finish the job, and I hope that we do. It's not a particularly flashy topic, but it's one of the most fundamental duties of the Congress. So our record is clear, and the voters responded by rewarding the majority with an even greater Senate majority in the next Congress. But we need to finish out the rest of this year strong. We're adding to our list of accomplishments this week by passing a bipartisan bill to provide critical funding for the Coast Guard. Our Coast Guard is made up of men and women who risk their lives to save others and to protect our ports and to stop illegal drugs from reaching our country. This bill ensures that they can continue that work with the predictability that they deserve. But moving forward, we have a significant to-do list before we break for Christmas. We need to finalize the Farm Bill. We need to reauthorize a number of other bills. And despite the large number of nominations we've been able to get done before we recess, there's still a huge backlog of many executive branch nominations. For some reason, after the 2016 election, our Democratic colleagues decided they were going to obstruct or delay as many Trump nominations to executive agencies or on the bench as they could. And unfortunately, they've been too successful in doing so. But I'm confident that Senate Majority Leader Senator McConnell will use the leverage of people wanting to get home at Christmas time and Thanksgiving to ensure that we get a maximum number of these non-controversial nominees supported. These are people who will enjoy broad bipartisan support if we can just get our Democratic colleagues to quit the obstruction. Mr. President, we just have a short time left to finish this Congress strong, but the past 2 years have been an unmitigated success for the country. We've delivered on promises we made. We put money back in the pockets of hardworking families. We enhanced community safety and fought for victims. We've modernized infrastructure and supported our men and women in uniform. And I hope we can continue this momentum into the 116th Congress that begins in January. Mr. President, I yield the floor.